All human beings are sexual beings. Seems clear enough, but it is not. Sexuality is complex, seemingly resisting definitions that are not reflective of integrating components of thought, form, and function of the human person and their sexual expression, gender, identity, relationships. Although the book of Genesis declares confidently male and female he created them, that assertion is more reflective of the limits of perception and understanding in the human author. It is totally inadequate as an expression of the splendor and grandeur of the Creator. If the human author was able to view creation from the perspective of the Creator, the author would not, could not, have stated their belief so confidently. The limited perception and understanding of the human author should not surprise us, or for that matter, dismay us. It was beyond the revelatory scope of the book of Genesis to consider all the ramifications of creation. Genesis celebrates the powerful scope of a creator God who rejoices in his creation. The intention of the revelation is not to provide a textbook description of creation and the many different nuances of the created activity. It is a joyful celebration of the Spirit of God who creates, breathes animating energy into the creation, and then releases the creation into what was once the abyss of nothingness, now filled with abundant life. Most of the biblical record that follows the book of Genesis is also reflective of the inadequacy of the human author, even an author who is inspired. The human sexual examples that are recorded in each narrative are much more concerned with specific examples of ritual purity than with any consideration of the scope of human sexuality. There is no commentary on human sexuality that is not presented in the context of a particular set of circumstances or a specific person and their choices. A generous commentary about the teaching of the Bible on human sexuality would admit that the biblical record is far from complete and not in the least comprehensive, nor was it intended to be. The complexity of the teaching and the perceived morality of human sexuality came much later, within the context of the scholastic and systematic theologians who did intend to catalog and to make judgments about all human actions. As wonderful and as inspirational the work of the great systematic and scholastic theologians might be, they too were people of their own time and place. The limits of what they could teach was directly limited to what they were able to experience and to observe. No systematic or scholastic theologian claimed a direct line of communication with God. They all admitted and accepted natural law and the observable universe as revelatory of the mind of God. It was enough, or so it seemed, to make judgments on everything that was necessary. When centuries later their efforts were clearly demonstrated as lacking the necessary complexity, there were no systematic theologians in place to offer a defense or commentary, since that effort had been effectively depleted. This point is not reckless. A simple application of the principles championed by these theologians, for example, the observable natural law, with the addition of an electron microscope, for example, clearly demonstrates the limits of what they were able to observe and therefore teach as natural. From our perspective, centuries after the original theological work had long been codified into the teaching traditions of the church and the canon law of the church, we are able to recognize that their work was incomplete. Not only was it incomplete, effectively limited by the tools for observation and research that were available to them, but is more than incomplete. It is fundamentally lacking, not only as a useful tool for knowledge and guidance, but even more fundamentally incomplete to the point where it is no longer reflective of any kind of truth other than being representative of the historical record of human thought. There have been limited attempts since the time of the scholastics to provide a comprehensive teaching about human sexuality. As a Redemptorist, we champion our own St. Alphonsus Liguori, and his pastoral efforts were groundbreaking, again, for his time and his place. However, any teaching that is engaged has been set into motion in reaction to the culture of the day and the practices of men and women within the culture. St. Alphonsus relied on the systematic theologians and their work for the basis of his own commentary. He was, however, unaware that their commentary, as already noted, was basically incomplete and flawed, and therefore his work was also limited. An improvement, no doubt, on what had been presented and accepted, but limited nonetheless. This takes nothing away from his effort or from his brilliance. It just admits and accepts a more comprehensive perspective. The experience of St. Alphonsus and the continuing experience within the theological community up until our present experience is also limited. For the most part, everything is commentary. Some of it is most certainly useful, while other commentary is not necessarily anything more than a reaction to something not understood. Many reactions to the unknown have proven to cause more harm than good than they intended. Moral theologians, and most certainly those who champion the systematic theologians as the last and final word on any subject, will most certainly disagree with my perception. It could be argued that the last significant teaching commentary on one singular component of human sexuality from an authoritative Roman Catholic source was Humanae Vitae, a papal encyclical from Pope Paul VI. It was published in July 1968 and was immediately welcomed by some and quickly dismissed by others. Without any commentary on the merits of the teaching, it effectively froze any possible teaching about sexual morality from a Catholic perspective because it polarized the conversation. Still later, Pope John Paul II proposed his Theology of the Body, a series of 129 lectures between September 5th, 1979 and November 28, 1984. His teaching was popularized by many who had previously championed Humanae Vitae, and it did allow for some adaptations to popular understanding, but for the most part was ignored by the larger population. The priestly abuse scandals, first reported by the Boston Globe in 2002, and further reporting about the sustained and coordinated cover-up of priest abuse by the hierarchy further eroded whatever sexual moral teaching voice the church might have once enjoyed. The lived reality, supported by the historical record and the experience of the people of God, is that a consistent teaching about sexual morality and human sexuality is not readily available for the formation of conscience and teaching. Any teaching that exists is weighed down by the dust of history, and even more by a lack of confidence in those who are entrusted to teach and to form the faithful and are unable to do so. The result is that people who sincerely desire to live a Christian life and practice a Christian sexual ethic are left floundering. The only choice seems to be to embrace teachings that have been proven by science and psychology to be incomplete, or to ignore all teaching and to listen to the voices of the prevailing culture without reference to a Catholic perspective. Uncomfortable choices for anyone, but particularly anyone with a scrupulous perspective. Of course, there's another choice. Deny everything that isn't the historical record and human experience. Demand blind obedience to the experts that taught and discerned in the earlier centuries. Declare anything and anyone that presents a contrary perspective as heretical and unfaithful. Dismiss people who discern their choices as maturely as possible in a difficult situation as cafeteria Catholics who risk the fires of hell. Substitute compassion and understanding with anger and righteousness, bellowing from the highest pulpit or social media platform. This direction is even more unfortunate for anyone with a scrupulous perspective. The most spiritually mature and healthy choice for a person is to seek a path of integrative and responsible understanding of who they are as a sexual person. The first step is to understand human sexuality as an integral part of what it means to be a human person. It's not something that needs to be feared, hidden, resisted, ignored, controlled, or harshly disciplined. A second step is to seek guidance and understanding from people whom you can trust. Invite them to engage in a conversation with you about how they learn to celebrate and appreciate their sexuality. Encourage them to share with you anything that they may have learned in their own sexual awakening and formation that was helpful and what was difficult and perhaps even challenging. Talk about the spirituality and the sacredness of the gift of sexuality. What it means to be responsible in your sexual choices and actions. What is acceptable exploration and learning? What might be understood best as an action or a choice that has limited potential as a healthy or mature choice and may be more harmful than helpful? Most of all, listen. Ask questions. Try to live what you have learned, and then repeat as necessary. Again, from the perspective of a scrupulous conscience. Try to have a discussion and a discerning process without an automatic reference to sin. Resist the urge to automatically default to a position where any experience of sexuality has to be somehow touched on some kind of experience of sin. Human sexuality pleases God. It does not displease God. Human sexuality is a gift. It is not a sin. God did not create human sexuality in order to trap you into a life of sin and to a final destination of hell. Embrace that sexuality is complex. And in the complexity, there is the wonder and the experience of a loving God.